3 months ago, my wife Sarah and I were planning what we thought would be the perfect romantic getaway. We'd been married for 6 years, and honestly, things had gotten a bit routine. You know how it is: work, bills, Netflix, sleep, repeat. We were both feeling the weight of city life pressing down on us. The constant noise, the pollution, the endless rat race. Sarah had been particularly stressed at her marketing job, working late nights and weekends, and I could see it wearing on her. "We need to do something different," she said one evening as we sat in our cramped Manhattan apartment, listening to sirens wail outside our window for the third time that hour. "Something that reminds us why we fell in love in the first place." That's when I suggested the yacht rental. I'd been researching it for weeks, looking at different options along the eastern seaboard. Nothing too fancy. We couldn't afford one of those luxury yachts you see celebrities on. But I found this perfect little 35-foot catamaran available for a week-long rental out of a marina in the Hamptons. It had a small cabin, a decent galley, and most importantly, it would get us away from everything. Sarah's eyes lit up when I showed her the photos. "Oh my God, yes. When can we book it?" We spent the next month planning every detail. Sarah bought new bikinis and sundresses. I studied nautical charts and weather patterns like I was preparing for some kind of maritime exam. I'd done some sailing in college. Nothing too serious, but enough to handle a boat like this. The plan was simple. 5 days on the water, just us, the ocean, and nothing but time to reconnect. The first 2 days were absolutely perfect. Better than perfect, actually. We sailed out from the marina on a gorgeous Tuesday morning in late September. The weather was ideal: clear skies, gentle winds, temperatures in the mid-70s. Sarah looked radiant in her new white sundress, her dark hair whipping in the breeze as she stood at the bow, arms outstretched like she was embracing the entire ocean. We anchored in quiet coves, made love on the deck under the stars, cooked simple meals in the tiny galley, and talked about everything and nothing. Sarah seemed like herself again for the first time in months. The stress lines around her eyes softened. She laughed at my terrible jokes, and she kept saying things like, "Why don't we do this more often?" and "I feel so free out here." On the second night, as we lay in the cabin listening to the gentle lapping of waves against the hull, she turned to me and said, "Thank you for this." I forgot how much I needed to breathe. I remember thinking that this trip had already been worth every penny, every hour of planning. My wife was happy. We were reconnecting, and I felt like maybe we found our way back to each other. If only I'd known that in less than 24 hours, everything would start falling apart. The third day began like the others. We woke up anchored in a beautiful bay about 15 miles from shore. Sarah made coffee while I checked the weather and planned our route for the day. The forecast looked great: light winds, calm seas. We decided to sail further out, maybe try some fishing. Around noon, we were about 20 miles offshore when I noticed the engine sputtering. We'd been motoring through a calm patch, sails down, just enjoying the sun. At first, I thought it was just a hiccup. These rental boats don't always get the best maintenance. But then the engine coughed, wheezed, and died completely. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, looking up from her book. "Probably nothing serious," I said, trying to sound confident. "Let me take a look." I spent the next hour in the engine compartment, sweating and cursing under my breath. I am no mechanic, but I know enough to check the obvious stuff: fuel, oil, spark plugs. Everything looked fine, but the engine wouldn't turn over. Wouldn't even attempt to start. That's when I noticed we were drifting. The wind had picked up slightly, and without the engine to maintain our position, we were being pushed steadily away from shore by a current I hadn't accounted for. "Sarah," I called out, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Can you help me get the sails up?" She must have heard something in my tone because she immediately put down her book and came to help. As we worked to raise the mainsail, I explained the situation. Dead engine, drifting current, and we were already further from shore than when we started. So we just sail back, right? She said. You know how to sail. Yeah, of course, I replied, but I was already doing the math in my head. The wind was coming from the southwest, which was exactly the direction we needed to go. We have to tack back and forth, zigzagging against the wind, and with the current working against us. It was going to take hours, maybe all day. As if the universe wanted to prove a point, the wind started picking up even more. What had been a pleasant breeze was becoming something more serious. The waves were getting bigger, and our little catamaran was starting to pitch and roll in ways that made Sarah grab onto the rigging with white knuckles. Maybe we should call for help, she said, raising her voice over the increasing wind. I looked at our position on the GPS. We were now almost 30 miles from shore and drifting further every minute. The Coast Guard was an option, but the thought of having to be rescued on what was supposed to be a romantic getaway felt like admitting failure. Let me try a few more things first, I said. That's when we saw the sail on the horizon. There, Sarah pointed excitedly. There's another boat. I grabbed the binoculars and focused on the distant white triangle. It was definitely a sailboat, and it seemed to be heading in our general direction. My first instinct was relief, but also embarrassment. Here I was, supposed to be the capable husband taking his wife on a romantic adventure, and we were about to need rescuing. 20 minutes later, the boat pulled alongside us. That's when I first saw him. He was exactly the kind of guy you imagine when someone says, experienced sailor. Probably late 30s, deeply tanned, with that weathered look that comes from spending serious time on the water. Thick brown hair with just a touch of gray at the temples, and these incredibly blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Looks like you folks could use some help, he called out with a grin. Engine died on us, I shouted back, trying to sound more casual than I felt. We can probably sail back, but in this wind, against that current? He shook his head. That's going to be a long, miserable trip. I am Marcus, by the way. Why don't you let me give you a tow? I looked at Sarah, who was already nodding enthusiastically. The wind had picked up even more, and our little catamaran was getting bounced around pretty good. The idea of trying to sail back in these conditions was looking less appealing by the minute. That would be amazing, Sarah called out. I am Sarah, and this is my husband David. Great to meet you both, Marcus replied, and I swear his smile got even brighter when Sarah introduced herself. Let me get a line over to you. The next hour was a masterclass in seamanship. Marcus maneuvered his boat with incredible skill, getting us rigged for towing without once making it seem difficult or dangerous. He explained everything he was doing, not in a condescending way, but like he genuinely enjoyed sharing his knowledge. His boat was incredible too. Maybe 45 feet, sleek and obviously well maintained. Not a rental like ours. Everything about it screamed professional sailor, from the perfectly coiled lines to the expensive-looking navigation equipment visible through the cockpit. The key is keeping the right distance, he told us as he adjusted the tow line. Too close and we collide in the swells, too far and the line goes slack and snaps tight. It's all about reading the water. Sarah hung on his every word. I noticed she moved to the bow of our boat, as close to his yacht as possible, listening intently as he explained the finer points of ocean towing. She kept asking questions. Good questions that showed she was really paying attention. You really know what you're doing, she said, and there was something in her voice I hadn't heard in a long time. Admiration, maybe, or was it something else? 20 years of sailing will teach you a few things, Marcus replied with that easy confidence. Plus, I grew up on boats. My dad had a charter business in the Caribbean. As we made our way back toward shore, Marcus suggested we head to a protected cove he knew rather than the main marina. There's a guy there who can probably fix your engine tonight or first thing tomorrow, he explained. And it's much calmer water. You'll be more comfortable. He was right. The cove was like a hidden paradise. Crystal clear water, white sand beach, and completely sheltered from the wind that was still whipping up the seas outside. Marcus anchored his boat about 50 feet from ours, then came over in his dinghy to take a look at our engine. 15 minutes later, he emerged from our engine compartment shaking his head. Bad news, I am afraid. Your fuel pump is shot. It's not something you can jury-rig. You're going to need a new part. My heart sank. How long will that take? Jimmy, the mechanic I mentioned, he might have one in stock. If not, he'll have to order it. Could be a couple days. Sarah and I looked at each other. A couple days stuck on a broken boat wasn't exactly what we planned. Tell you what, Marcus said, seeming to read our expressions. Why don't you come over to my boat for dinner? They got plenty of food, and we can figure out a plan. No sense sitting here worrying about it. That's how we ended up on Marcus's yacht that evening, and looking back, that's when everything started to change. His boat was incredible, not flashy or over the top, but everything was perfect. The teak was beautifully maintained, the brass fittings gleamed, and every line and sail was perfectly organized. You could tell this wasn't just a boat to him, it was home. This is gorgeous, Sarah breathed as we climbed aboard. How long have you had her? 3 years, Marcus said, clearly pleased by her reaction. I saved for 10 years to buy her. She's a 1987 Hallberg Rassy, Swedish built. They don't make them like this anymore. He gave us a complete tour, and I had to admit, I was impressed too. Everything was compact but efficient, and there were thoughtful details everywhere. The galley was small but perfectly equipped. The navigation station had charts and instruments that looked like they belonged on a much larger vessel. You live aboard? I asked. 6 months a year, he nodded. I spend winters in the Caribbean, summers up here. I do some charter work, but mostly I just live. That sounds amazing, Sarah said, and there was that tone again. Don't you ever get lonely? Marcus looked at her for a moment before answering. Sometimes, but there's something about the freedom that makes up for it. No schedules, no bosses, no traffic jams. Just you and the sea. He made dinner. Fresh fish he caught that morning, rice with coconut milk, and vegetables from some market in the Bahamas. Everything was delicious, but more than that, he was an amazing host. Funny, interesting, full of stories about places he been and things he seen. Sarah was completely captivated. She laughed at all his jokes, asked about his travels, and seemed genuinely fascinated by his lifestyle. I found myself feeling oddly left out of the conversation, like I was watching them connect in a way that didn't include me. So what do you two do back in the real world? Marcus asked as we finished eating. I started to answer, but Sarah jumped in first. I work in marketing for a tech company. 60-hour weeks, constant pressure, corporate politics. It's soul-crushing, honestly. And you? Marcus looked at me. Finance, I said. Investment banking. Also soul-crushing, but it pays the bills. The golden handcuffs. Marcus nodded knowingly. I used to be in corporate law. Made great money. Hated every minute of it. How did you get out? Sarah asked eagerly. One day I realized I was spending my whole life making money so I could afford a lifestyle I didn't actually want. So I sold everything, bought this boat, and never looked back. Sarah stared at him like he just revealed the secret to eternal happiness. That's incredibly brave. Or incredibly stupid, I interjected, trying to keep the mood light. Depending on your perspective, Marcus laughed, but Sarah shot me a look I couldn't quite read. Annoyance? Disappointment? The next morning, Jimmy the mechanic showed up bright and early. He was exactly what you expect from a guy who fixes boat engines for a living, grease-stained overalls, weathered hands, and the kind of practical knowledge that comes from decades of experience. The diagnosis wasn't good. Yep, fuel pump's dead as a doornail, he confirmed after poking around our engine for about 10 minutes. And this isn't a standard part. Going to have to order it special. How long? I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. 3, maybe 4 days. Got to come from the manufacturer in Florida, then ship up here. Sarah and I exchanged glances. Our vacation was supposed to end in 2 days. I had meetings on Monday that I couldn't miss, and Sarah had a big presentation she'd been preparing for weeks. Is there any way to speed it up? I asked. Jimmy shrugged. I can try, but these specialty marine parts, they move at their own pace. That's when Marcus appeared in his dinghy, rowing over from his yacht with 2 cups of coffee and that easy smile of his. How's the patient? He asked, nodding toward our engine. Jimmy filled him in on the situation. Marcus listened, nodding thoughtfully, then turned to us. You know, there's no reason you have to sit here waiting for the part, he said. Why don't you come sailing with me for a few days? I was planning to cruise up the coast anyway. We can come back when Jimmy's got your engine sorted. I was about to politely decline when Sarah spoke up. That sounds amazing, she said quickly. I mean, if you sure we wouldn't be imposing. Not at all, Marcus replied, and his smile seemed to focus entirely on her. I enjoy the company. Something in my gut told me this was a bad idea, but I couldn't articulate why without sounding paranoid or jealous. And Sarah was looking at me with these hopeful eyes, clearly excited about the prospect of continuing our adventure. Are you sure? I asked Marcus. 3 people on a boat for several days. That's a lot to ask. Trust me, it'll be fun, he said. Besides, my boat's plenty big enough. You guys can have the forward cabin, I'll take the aft. It'll be like a mini charter cruise. An hour later, we were transferring our belongings to Marcus' yacht. Sarah was practically bouncing with excitement, chattering about how this was turning into a real adventure, and how lucky we were to meet someone so generous. I tried to share her enthusiasm, but something felt off. Maybe it was the way Marcus watched Sarah as she moved around his boat, taking in every detail. Or maybe it was how Sarah seemed to light up whenever he spoke to her. Whatever it was, I had this nagging feeling that I was making a mistake. But Sarah was happy, happier than I'd seen her in months. So I pushed down my concerns and tried to enjoy the experience. Marcus was an incredible sailor, no question about that. As we left the cove and headed north along the coast, he handled his boat with the kind of effortless skill that made it look easy. He let Sarah take the wheel, standing behind her to guide her hands, showing her how to feel the wind and read the sails. You're a natural, he told her as she steered us through a tricky channel between 2 islands. Most people fight the boat, but you're working with it. Sarah beamed at the compliment. I love this, she said. I can't believe they never really sailed before. David's sailed before, Haven, you? Marcus asked, including me in the conversation. A little in college, I admitted. Nothing like this though. You really know what you're doing. It's not about knowing, Marcus said, still standing close behind Sarah. It's about feeling. The boat tells you what it needs if you listen. I noticed he didn't move away from Sarah when he said this. His hands were still covering hers on the wheel, and she didn't seem to mind at all. That afternoon, we anchored in another beautiful cove. Marcus suggested we go snorkeling, and produced masks and fins from one of his many perfectly organized storage compartments. The water was incredibly clear, and we spent an hour exploring the reef together. Well, Marcus and Sarah spent an hour exploring together. I felt awkward and out of place underwater, struggling with equipment that didn't quite fit while they glided around like they were born to it. Marcus kept pointing out fish and coral formations to Sarah, swimming close beside her, occasionally touching her arm to get her attention. When we climbed back onto the boat, Sarah was exhilarated. That was incredible, she gasped, pulling off her mask. I've never seen anything like that. Wait until you see the reef at Antigua, Marcus said, toweling off his hair. Or the blue holes in the Bahamas. The water there is so clear you feel like you're flying. You've been to all those places? Sarah asked, wrapping herself in a towel. And more, Marcus nodded. Madagascar, Seychelles, French Polynesia. The world looks different from the water. You see things you never would from land. Sarah hung on every word as he described his travels. Remote islands, pristine beaches, encounters with dolphins and whales. He painted a picture of a life that was everything our urban existence wasn't. Free, adventurous, connected to nature. It sounds like a dream, Sarah said wistfully. It doesn't have to be a dream, Marcus replied, and something in his tone made me look up sharply. Anyone can do it if they really want to badly enough. That evening, as we sat in the cockpit watching the sunset, Marcus broke out a bottle of wine he'd been saving. It was something expensive from France that he'd bought in Saint Martin, and it was absolutely delicious. The conversation flowed as smoothly as the wine. Marcus told stories about storms he'd weathered, ports he'd visited, people he'd met along the way. Sarah asked question after question, completely absorbed in his tales of adventure and freedom. I tried to contribute to the conversation, but I felt increasingly like an outsider. My stories about corporate life and city living seemed bland and irrelevant compared to Marcus's adventures. When I mentioned a difficult client or a challenging project, Sarah barely seemed to register what I was saying. But when Marcus talked about sailing through a pod of whales or anchoring off a deserted beach in the Caribbean, she was completely captivated. As the evening wore on and the wine flowed, I watched my wife falling under the spell of a man who represented everything I wasn't. And the worst part? I couldn't even hate him for it. He was genuinely likable, generous, and living an undeniably fascinating life. When we finally went to bed that night, Sarah was unusually quiet. We lay in the forward cabin, listening to the gentle lapping of waves against the hull, but the easy intimacy we shared the first few days of our trip felt distant. This is amazing, she said softly. Being out here, away from everything. I should have seen it coming then. Should have recognized the tone in her voice, the way she was already mentally comparing this life to ours back home. But I was still trying to be the understanding husband, still hoping this was just a temporary fascination with something new and exciting. I had no idea how wrong I was. The fourth day started with Sarah waking up before me, which was unusual. I found her in the cockpit with Marcus, both of them holding steaming cups of coffee and talking in low voices. They looked up when I appeared, and I caught something in their expressions, a fleeting moment of intimacy that made my stomach clench. Morning, sleepyhead, Sarah said, but her smile seemed forced. Marcus was just telling me about the dolphins he saw earlier. They come through here every morning around sunrise, Marcus explained easily. If you re-up early enough, you can swim with them sometimes. I poured myself coffee and joined them, but the conversation felt stilted now. Sarah kept glancing at Marcus when she thought I wasn't looking, and he seemed more reserved than he'd been the previous days. We spent the morning sailing to yet another pristine cove, but something had shifted. Sarah and Marcus still worked together adjusting sails and reading charts, but there was an undercurrent of tension I couldn't ignore. When Sarah laughed at his jokes, it felt performative. When Marcus complimented her sailing, I saw her flush with pleasure in a way that made my chest tight. That afternoon, while Marcus was below checking something in the engine room, I found myself alone with Sarah for the first time in days. You seem different, I said carefully. She was looking out at the water, wind whipping her dark hair around her face. Different how? Happier, I guess. More alive. She turned to me then, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not just happiness, but a kind of awakening, like she was seeing possibilities she'd never considered. I am happier, she said quietly. Being out here, it's like I can finally breathe. Like I can see what life could be instead of what it is. What do you mean? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. David, when was the last time you felt truly free? Not weekend free or vacation free, but actually free? I started to answer, but she continued. Because I can't remember ever feeling like this. Out here, with the sun and the water and no deadlines or meetings or expectations. I feel like myself for the first time in years. Marcus's head appeared from below deck before I could respond. Everything okay up here? Perfect, Sarah said quickly, and that forced brightness was back in her voice. That evening, our last night before heading back to collect our repaired boat, Marcus suggested we anchor in one final cove, a place he called his secret spot. It was spectacular, completely isolated, surrounded by high cliffs that glowed golden in the setting sun. I come here when I need to think, he told us as we dropped anchor. It's one of the few places left that hasn't been discovered by the charter boats. We had dinner on deck, another one of Marcus's perfectly prepared meals, but the conversation was subdued. Everyone seemed to sense that something was ending, that tomorrow we returned to our broken boat and eventually to our regular lives. After dinner, I went below to use the head, and when I came back up, I found Sarah and Marcus standing close together at the stern, looking out at the water. They weren't touching, but there was something in their posture, in the way they leaned toward each other, that stopped me in my tracks. I cleared my throat, and they stepped apart quickly. Beautiful night, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. Incredible, Sarah agreed, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. We went to bed early that night, but I lay awake listening to Sarah's breathing, wondering if she was awake too. Wondering what she was thinking about. Wondering if she was thinking about him. The next morning, we sailed back to Jimmy's marina in relative silence. Our catamaran was waiting for us, engine running smoothly, Jimmy beaming with pride at his repair work. Good as new, he announced. Maybe better. As we transferred our belongings back to our own boat, I watched Sarah move slowly, reluctantly. She kept glancing back at Marcus's yacht, and I saw her eyes well up with what looked like tears. Marcus was helping us with our bags, and when he handed Sarah her duffel, their fingers brushed. She looked up at him, and for just a moment, I saw something pass between them that excluded me entirely. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. This has been my pleasure, Marcus replied, and his voice was gentler than I ever heard it. Take care of yourself, Sarah. We said our goodbyes, exchanged contact information to stay in touch, and motored out of the marina. Behind us, Marcus's yacht grew smaller until it was just a white speck on the horizon. The trip back to our starting point should have been triumphant. We survived a mechanical failure, made a new friend, had an adventure. But Sarah stared back toward the open ocean for most of the journey, and when I tried to talk to her about getting home, about work, about our regular life, she gave me one-word answers. That night, our last night on the water, we anchored in the same cove where we started our trip 6 days earlier. I tried to recapture the magic of those first 2 perfect days, but it was impossible. Sarah was physically present but mentally somewhere else. Probably on a 45-foot yacht with a man who lived the life she never known she wanted. We made love that night, but it felt like goodbye. 3 months later, I came home from work to find a note on our kitchen table. Sarah had taken a leave of absence from her job, she wrote. She needed time to figure things out, to understand what she really wanted from life. She'd be staying with her sister for a while. She didn't mention Marcus in the note, but she didn't need to. I found her laptop still open on the counter, showing a Facebook page full of photos. Tropical sunsets, pristine beaches, and Sarah laughing on the deck of a familiar yacht, her dark hair whipping in Caribbean wind. The last photo was posted just hours before I found the note. Sarah and Marcus on a beach somewhere, her hand in his, both of them tanned and smiling with the kind of joy I'd only seen in her eyes during those few days when she thought she could have it all. I stared at that photo for a long time, remembering the woman who stood at the bow of our rented catamaran with her arms outstretched, embracing the ocean. I thought I was giving her a gift, a break from routine, a chance to reconnect. Instead, I'd shown her a door to a life I could never provide. The yacht rental company called 2 weeks later. They wanted to know if we'd be interested in booking again next season. They had a special rate for returning customers. I told them I'd have to get back to them. I never did.